So here's part two that I really didn't get to the question about why December 25th and January the 6th. So I apologize. As I said, I could go on talking, so I'm not going to make this very long. This won't be a whole nother hour, but I just want to do a part two. This is bonus for you all. Here's what happened. I was describing the difference between Western and Eastern Christianity. Well, as the West became more powerful, and of course, historically, the Eastern Empire, the Eastern Byzantine Empire, of course, becomes Islamic in the 13th and 14th century. So that Eastern Christianity now is basically goes silent in some ways, if you will, because now their world is defined by the Islamic calendar and by Islam. But in the West, that it's still defined by Rome, if you will. And so what happens is that scientifically, as science begins to develop in the 12th and 13th century, that the scientists begin to realize that the calendar is out of sync. That if we're working on a solar calendar, where Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar with a set number of days every year, this is why Ramadan can fall anytime during the year, right? It's not set in a given time period because of the lunar calendar. But in the West, in Western Christianity, that really defines the whole of the culture and the social, political world of Western Europe, that the scientists began to realize that the calendar was out of date, and that we were increasingly every year missing time, that it wasn't keeping the proper time, that we were actually gaining more days, and we weren't calendar-wise, weren't sticking to 365 days. It was now 370 days that a year. Anyway, and I'm not a scientist, so I can't, I'm not really explaining it well. So that in this, how we get the difference between December 25th and January 6th comes when the standard calendar in use in the 16th century was called the Julian calendar, after the Romans, after the Roman emperors. So the Emperor Julius Caesar started this calendar, and so that by the 16th century, the Julian calendar was almost 15 days out of sync with reality, with the way that the earth went around the sun. And so the scientists came to the Pope, Pope Gregory, and said, we need to do something about this because this is increasingly becoming more and more crazy. And so Pope Gregory decided that, yes, that would happen. And it's interesting. So that in the United States, in 1752, when the Gregorian calendar, that's what the West follows in its dating, that in 1752, when the United States adopted the Gregorian calendar, that September was the designated month when this change would happen. So if you were living in the United States and September the 2nd was your day, the next day after September 2nd, when we shifted the calendar, the next day after September the 2nd was September the 14th. So that 12 days were gone, were disappeared, that there was no longer that time. So on what following the calendar, the 3rd of September was now the 14th of September, and now with the Gregorian calendar and the various leap years were introduced, that now there's a way to correct every other year the calendar, so that we're not so far off time. But what happened was that because this was a decision of the Pope in Rome in the West, that the Orthodox Christians in the East said the Pope isn't going to tell us what to do. And so they stayed with the Julian calendar. And for them, when we shifted from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, now December the 25th was actually January the 6th. And so the Orthodox Christians maintained Christmas on January the 6th because that's what it became. And so many of the Orthodox communities now have adapted to this and adopted December 25th as a celebration of Christmas. But there are still communities in Russia, in Turkey, in Egypt, where the Orthodox communities celebrate Christmas on January the 6th because they are still on the Julian calendar and haven't moved to the Gregorian calendar. So that's the technical reason why there's a difference between January the 6th and December the 25th, because most of Christianity follows the Gregorian calendar, and some Orthodox Christians still follow the Julian calendar. In a way, January the 6th is also, in the West, the celebration of the Feast of Epiphany. And what that means is that in Matthew's Gospel, X number of days after the birth of Jesus, 3 wise men or 3 astrologers show up in Bethlehem, and they are now the witnesses to the revelation of God in Jesus. And so in the West, it's the Feast of the Epiphany, but in Orthodoxy, it's a celebration of Christmas. So that's a long way for this bonus time to get to why there's a difference in the celebration of Christmas for Orthodox Christians and for all of the rest of Western Christianity, Protestant Christianity, and Roman Catholicism. It's interesting that in the United States, the first outside of the Roman Catholic communities that were founded by the Spanish in the 16th and 17th century, that the Protestants who come to the United States living up in Massachusetts, the Puritans, absolutely refused to celebrate Christmas because there was no date in the Bible for it. There was no December 25th, and you didn't celebrate something that wasn't in the Bible. So many Christians living in New England in that time period of the 17th century never celebrated Christmas. So there is much interesting conflict, controversy surrounding Christmas, not only from what I shared with you earlier. And I apologize that we didn't have time for questions. We had a few questions that came along, and I'm not sure if anybody is still on air with us with this. I hope there have been. So perhaps you can send questions via the Facebook and YouTube pages, and they can get them to me, and I will answer them. So there we have it. The story of Christmas from the scriptures, parallel stories as to how we understand birth stories, whether it's Muhammad's birth story or Jesus's birth story, how the Quran tells us also a very miraculous birth of Jesus, parallel to the Christian scriptures and the miraculous birth story of Jesus, if you will, but also how this has developed, right, in terms of whether we're going to date all of Western life according to the birth of Jesus, which didn't happen in the year 0, but rather in the 4 years before the Common Era begins, in 0. Are we going to date it that way? Are we going to recognize that people have a different way of dating things, whether it's through Islam or in China, in Hinduism and Buddhism, that all of our, or Judaism with the dating of creation. So the calendar plays, but I want you to also think that this is oftentimes a political choice and decision that has to do with conflicting narratives and stories, and who's got the truth and who doesn't have the truth. But it's also powerfully spiritual and theological stories too. And that really is what's important. That ultimately Christians in the West also celebrate the Epiphany, and so we can We think it's great to have 2 Christmases. I did this year, celebrate Christmas. I leave my Christmas lights up till January the 6th so that Christians in Orthodoxy in the West, Protestant and Roman Catholics can celebrate that together. And we can still honor the birth of Jesus without having to get into fights and into conflict. So I think that's the end of my story. And I don't think we need to go on for an hour, right? So I think with that, if there are still people watching and listening that have questions, that's great. But otherwise, thanks, Islamic Speakers Bureau, for having me, and I apologize for not paying attention to the time. Azra, thank you for inviting me to share this, and thanks to all of the community out there. Hope it helps with next year when we come around to Christmas, that you'll remember some of the things that I said, and that you'll know wherever you may be when you come across a Western Protestant or Roman Catholic or Orthodox Christian, you'll know why they're celebrating the birth of Jesus on those days. Great.
Thank you, Pastor Maya. This is something I've always wanted to learn about, so I'm happy we had a chance to learn from you. Thank you also to everyone who was able to join us this evening. As you know, ISBA is a nonprofit organization and depends on financial support from the community. Please help us bring more programs like the one you experienced tonight by donating generously to ISBA. We're working to fill our 2021 schedule for ILM circles, so please check back at our website and at our Facebook page in the coming weeks. Stay safe and healthy. Good evening.